Scientists typically define a mass extinction as an event when more than 3/4 of all species disappeared from planet Earth in a relatively short period of geologic time. One of the world's leading experts on mass extinctions is Dr. Michael Benton, professor of vertebrate paleontology at the University of Bristol in the UK. His research focuses on the end Permian mass extinction, the most severe of our planet's 5 major extinction events. And one of his most well-known papers on the subject was titled, "How to Kill Almost All Life, the End Permian Extinction Event." Welcome, Dr. Benton.
Hello.
How severe was the Permian mass extinction?
It was the biggest of all, and best estimates suggest that only about 5% of species survived. So that means 19 out of 20 species were killed off by the crisis. What was the process? You had described in this paper, although it was several years ago, that 6 degrees C rise in temperature, then releasing methane in the ocean. Is that still your sense of it? Yes, I think that's the model that people would commonly accept today. People who looked for evidence of impact were very familiar with the idea that dinosaurs were wiped out by the impact of a meteorite 65 million years ago. But in this case, the evidence for impact at this event, 250 million years ago, much more ancient, is non-existent, unfortunately. But there is great evidence for massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia in Russia, producing millions and millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide is a well-known greenhouse gas. And this sort of thing happens in a small scale with all volcanoes, but these eruptions were so much more massive than anything we're familiar with today. And then a string of consequences followed from that. As you mentioned, massive heating. And now the estimates are more than 6 degrees, in some cases 10 or 15 degrees, which adds up to a huge difference from the regular temperature. The overheating on land was associated with acid rain, and the acid rain, all the evidence suggests this killed off virtually all the plants on land. If you remove the plants, the trees in particular, the soil is loosened and is washed into the sea, and there's a great deal of evidence for mass removal of soil and massive erosion. And then all that vast amount of mud coming into the sea, as well as the heating, cause very bad effects, lack of oxygen and clogging of the feeding apparatus of all the sea creatures.
Is it possible that 7 billion people burning fossil fuels today could approach the impact on the planet of the eruption of the Siberian traps?
I think that the levels of CO2 input and the rate at that time were way higher than anything that human beings are doing today. However, we're doing it in a slightly slower way, but the levels are rising nonetheless. And of course, looking at these ancient events shows us times of global warming. And the atmosphere doesn't care whether the carbon dioxide comes from human activity or from a volcano. It has the same end effect. So we can use the data from these past events to calculate the rate at which climates may change in the future.
You have characterized what's happening today as possibly the 6th major extinction. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, well, many other mass extinction events were caused by this same kind of sequence of events, as far as we can tell. And the impact which caused the extinction of the dinosaurs was the odd one out. So of the big 5 events that you mentioned, the evidence is that 4 at least. And even the end of the dinosaurs, there was massive volcanic eruption in India. So there may have been some input there. And the present day, then, 2 reasons, I guess, people call it the 6th mass extinction. I'm not the only one. First of all, the production of carbon dioxide, which is changing climates, which is causing sea levels to rise at the present time, is happening at a fast rate, geologically speaking. So as a geologist, I think in terms of something happening in less than 1 million years as fast. I know that's not fast to human beings. But nonetheless, the effects can be cumulative. They build up. And the second reason that people have referred to the current time as the 6th mass extinction
is that we do know lots of species are going extinct. Famous ones like the dodo and the moas in the giant birds in New Zealand, but many, many more quietly, unnoticed, unheralded, many, many species going extinct today.
Can you talk a little bit about tipping points and how tipping points lead to extinctions? What they are, how they get there?
Yes, this is something I can't say too much about, but there is something we have to be aware of, that the Earth systems can correct for excess of carbon dioxide and for other changes, because there is a certain amount of feedback going on. There are processes that mitigate or cope with normal variations in gases like carbon dioxide and other changes. So, of course, the Earth doesn't keep rocketing from one condition of crisis to another. You could think of it as a kind of system of stabilization. But from time to time, or the evidence seems to suggest that if you build, for example, carbon dioxide to a sufficient level, these normal feedback processes won't pick up and won't be sufficient. They won't be able to cope. So, and then you get to the so-called tipping point where everything falls apart. And that's one of the big discussion points. When would that happen? Is it going to happen in 10 years or 100 years? And I certainly don't have the answer to that. I don't know if anybody does. But we do know for sure that the normal kind of feedback and stabilization processes are not infinite. They will cope with normal kinds of variations and bring the system back to normal with it on a year-by-year basis. But if we keep pumping carbon dioxide at a certain rate into the atmosphere and keep increasing that rate, there may well come a point where the Earth's forests, the Earth's oceans, the plankton, all the organisms that absorb carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, can't cope, and then you've got to the tipping point.
What role might the melting of the methane in the Siberian permafrost, or perhaps the methane hydrate under the sea, play in pushing us toward a tipping point in the modern era?
Yes, that's part of what would be called positive feedback. We're normally hoping for negative feedback, meaning that as CO2 goes up, plants absorb more of it and produce more oxygen and bring the level down again. But of course, one of the consequences of warming is we know for sure that the amount of methane released from the tundra, particularly Siberian tundra, is rising. Now, of course, how far that goes, we don't know. And when the tipping point comes, we don't know. But this is a positive feedback, because you have a situation of warming the atmosphere by 0.5 degree or 1 degree, and then that melts the ice and it produces methane, which itself is a powerful greenhouse gas, much more so than CO2. And that adds to the effect. And so sometimes people have talked about this as a so-called, the risk is a so-called runaway greenhouse, which is the self-correcting mechanisms cease to kick in, and you heat by a little bit and you release methane. That then causes excess heating, and you release more methane, and so it goes on. Of course, there will come a point when it's all been released. So once the ice in the tundra and the various frozen resources of methane in the deep ocean have been released, they can just be released once only. It takes a long time to recharge those. But it's believed that at the end of the Permian, 250 million years ago, this kind of runaway greenhouse exacerbated the effect, made it an awful lot worse.
Have we underestimated the interconnectedness of all the various systems that make up planet Earth, the interconnectedness functionally of all life?
I think that I think the majority of people do understand that point, that actions can have consequences, and I think people see enough of this now at their own level that they don't have to be experts in climate or theoretical modelers or anything to see it. The consequences are there. We know that. You can't do something without having a consequence. And I think more and more people are seeing the climate changing, sea levels rising. It's not happening fast, because at a human scale, we find it hard to think in terms of a century. You know, we sort of think, oh, well, I'll be gone by then, it doesn't matter. But of course, we do have to step back and think these things are happening. We know that. There is hard evidence that temperatures have risen by about 1 degree in the last 50, 100 years, which kind of sounds like nothing. So it's easy to rationalize it away and say, oh, that doesn't matter. But then another degree in the next 50 years, another degree, and then you do get towards the tipping point that you mentioned before. And so I think anybody who reads, anybody who travels, comes to understand that changes are happening.
We have maybe 15 or 20 seconds, Professor. Are humans at risk?
Not in the immediate future. I think humans are very adaptable. I think we will think of technologies. But I think in this debate, people often get timescales confused. And they will think, OK, we can solve this one now for the next 10 years. Yes, that's right. But can we solve this one for the next 1,000 years? And very likely that's a lot tougher. I think, though, that the current debate, where many politicians in a sense, are living in a sort of imaginary world where they're assuming it's not going to happen. And that's another problem. Decision makers maybe only have 3 years or 5 years in office. They don't want to make tough decisions. So, yeah, we are at risk.
Okay. Professor Benton, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.